It's a typical Tuesday afternoon, and I'm at the corner store just trying to snag some chips and a soda. The usual teenager stuff. Nothing about the day screamed, "You're about to become a hostage in a robbery gone sideways." But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs, especially when you least expect them. So there I am, browsing the snack aisle when this dude bursts in. Now, we're not talking about a regular customer here. This guy's got a look in his eyes that screams trouble, and before I know it, he's announcing a stick-up. Classic, right? Only I'm suddenly part of the plot. Before I can even process what's happening, he grabs me, says I'm his insurance policy. Yeah, because dragging a teenager along is going to smooth things over with the cops. But in the moment, you don't argue with the guy making demands, especially when he's waving a weapon around. We make a break for it, with me trying to keep up, half dragged down the street. My mind's racing a mile a minute. I'm thinking about how I'm going to explain this to my mom, or worse, how I'm going to end up on some evening news segment. But then, we duck into the last place I'd expect, a bowling alley. It's like we've stepped into an alternate dimension. There's the sound of pins crashing, people laughing, and music blasting over the speakers. For a second, I forget I'm technically a hostage in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. The robber, still keeping a tight grip, steers us through the crowd, trying to blend in. He's muttering under his breath about laying low until the heat dies down. Meanwhile, I'm scanning the place, wondering if any of these bowlers moonlight as undercover heroes in their spare time. Spoiler, they don't. Then, the inevitable happens. The cops show up, and the atmosphere shifts from casual Tuesday fun to a scene straight out of a suspense thriller. They're moving through the place, eyes sharp, checking faces. And I'm there, heart pounding, wondering if this is how it all ends. But here's the kicker. The cops can't find us. Amidst the commotion of a busy bowling night, we're just another pair of players. The robber, sensing an opportunity, relaxes his grip and even cracks a joke about my striking potential. I'm not amused, but survival instincts urge me to play along. As the minutes tick by, tension thick in the air, I realize this guy doesn't have an exit plan. He's winging it, and I'm an unwilling participant in his poorly thought-out improvisation. But then, something changes. Maybe it's the realization of his dead-end situation, or a moment of clarity. But he looks at me, and for a second, I see remorse. He leans in, whispers that I should head to the bathroom and wait 5 minutes before walking out. Just like that, he's gone, disappearing into the crowd, leaving me standing there, a mix of relieved and utterly bewildered. I follow his advice, not willing to risk anything else. And when I finally step outside, blending back into the normalcy of a world that hasn't just been turned upside down, I'm hit with a wave of emotions: relief, fear, disbelief. The aftermath is a blur. I give my statement to the cops, who are frustratingly sympathetic and annoyingly inquisitive. I'm hailed as a survivor, a victim, a witness, all titles I never wanted. But through it all, one thought keeps replaying in my mind: the look of remorse on the robber's face. It's a small comfort, but it makes me think. Maybe there's more to people than their worst actions. Maybe everyone's got a story, a reason for the paths they choose. So there you have it. The story of how my quick trip to the corner store turned into an unexpected adventure in a bowling alley, complete with a crash course in crime. It's not something I'd want to repeat, but it's definitely a story for the ages. Or, at the very least, a killer story to share on True Tales and Thrills. Sunday nights at our local bowling alley were an unwritten tradition for my friends and me, a way to cling to the weekend a little longer before the drudgery of school and work resumed. This place, with its worn lanes and the scent of polished wood and stale beer, felt like a second home. It was the backdrop to countless memories, a sanctuary. But one night, this sanctuary turned into a scene straight out of a nightmare. I was there just like any other Sunday, goofing around with my buddies when it happened. The first indication that this night would be etched into my memory for all the wrong reasons, came just after 11 p.m. It was a sound, sharp and sudden, cutting through the laughter and the clatter of pins, a sound I mistook for a firecracker. In that instant, everything went silent. You could literally hear a pin drop. The whole place was eerily still, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting. But the silence didn't last. Within seconds, the shooting started again. Panic set in as reality hit. This wasn't a firecracker. The glass sliding doors to the entrance shattered, sending shards across the floor. Bullets tore through the bar, one narrowly missing the bartender, who later told me a bullet whizzed right by her head. Amid the chaos, I learned that an innocent bystander inside the alley had been wounded. 2 others involved sped off in a car, only to be found by the police at a hospital. One had a gun on him, and another was found in the car. The police quickly arrested a 21-year-old, charging him with being a felon in possession of a firearm and discharging it in public. The officers hinted at a deeper conflict, suggesting more arrests were on the horizon. That night, huddled in fear, my friends and I, along with a few others, found ourselves trapped, the sounds of the gunfight terrifyingly close. There was no clear path to an emergency exit, so we ran into a bathroom. 3 other men and a young woman joined us. She was crying, huddled in a stall, talking to her mom on the phone. I tried to barricade the door, my body tense, listening to the gunfire outside. Outside, bullet shells littered the ground. Cars in the parking lot were riddled with holes, one windshield completely shattered. It turned out there were multiple shooters from 2 groups. An altercation in the parking lot escalated into a gunfight, with some participants seeking refuge inside the alley. After that night, nothing felt the same. The bowling alley, once a place of joy and leisure, now had an off-duty police officer on guard. It's a constant reminder of how quickly things can turn, how a place that felt like a second home can suddenly become a scene of horror. Driving home that night, the events replayed in my mind over and over. I couldn't shake the feeling of how close we'd come to real harm. Walking through my front door, I've never been so grateful to be home. I hugged my family a little tighter, a little longer. You never know what can happen at any time. I found myself thinking, a sentiment that stayed with me ever since. This incident, this terrifying brush with violence, has taught me to never take safety for granted and to cherish every moment with loved ones. And it's a story I share not to spread fear, but awareness. A reminder of the unpredictability of life and the importance of being vigilant, of holding on to those we love a little tighter, because in an instant, everything can change. Growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and the most exciting event was the annual fall fair, my childhood friend Jamie and I had to make our own fun. Our spot was the local bowling alley. It was our go-to spot for celebrating good grades, birthdays, or just the end of another boring week. This story, however, isn't about celebrations. It's about the night that could have ended in tragedy, but instead taught us a lesson we'd never forget. It was a chilly evening, just cold enough that you could see your breath in the air, but not so cold that it discouraged us from going out. Jamie and I were both 12, filled with the invincible feeling that only comes with being that age. We decided to head to the bowling alley to break the monotony of a lazy, uneventful Saturday. The bowling alley was a relic from the 80s, with carpet that had seen better days and a snack bar that probably hadn't updated its menu since the place opened. But to us, it was perfect. We had just laced up our clownish-looking bowling shoes and started our first game when a group of older kids caught our attention. They were loud, laughing, and carrying on in a way that made Jamie and I both envious and curious. They seemed to embody that elusive aura of coolness that we were both desperately beginning to chase. Halfway through our second game, one of the older boys approached us. He introduced himself as Mike and complimented our bowling skills, a clear overstatement. We were flattered nonetheless. Mike was charismatic, the kind of person who could make you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. He invited us to join his group for a game, and we eagerly accepted, abandoning our lane without a second thought. The game was fun, filled with friendly banter and laughter. Mike kept buying us sodas from the vending machine, and though Jamie seemed a little hesitant, I brushed it off. I was too caught up in the moment, basking in the attention and the thrill of hanging out with the older kids. As the night wore on, the alley began to empty, the soundtrack of crashing pins growing quieter with each passing hour. It was then that Mike suggested we all go to a party he knew about, just a short walk from the bowling alley. Jamie shot me a look, a silent conversation we'd perfected over years of friendship. Something felt off, but I was too caught up with the idea of attending an actual party to pay heed to that nagging feeling in my gut. We gathered our things, ready to follow Mike and his friends out into the night, when the owner of the alley, Mr. Jacobs, called out to us. Mr. Jacobs was a gruff man who had known Jamie and me since we were toddlers, watching us grow up in and out of his bowling alley. "Where are you kids off to this late with them?" he asked, a protective edge to his voice. Mike smoothly interjected, assuring Mr. Jacobs we were just heading to a local party and that he'd make sure we got home safe. Jamie and I nodded along, but Mr. Jacobs wasn't convinced. He insisted on calling our parents to let them know. That's when Jamie grabbed my arm, the urgency in her grip snapping me out of my reckless haze. "We should really get home, it's late," she whispered, her voice shaky. Mr. Jacobs, sensing our sudden apprehension, stepped in and offered to drive us home. Mike and his friends protested, but a stern look from Mr. Jacobs had them backing down quickly. They left with a few choice words, leaving a tense silence in their wake. The car ride home was quiet, Jamie and I too shaken to speak. Mr. Jacobs didn't ask any questions. He just gave us a gentle reminder to be careful about who we trust. When we got to Jamie's house, we found her parents waiting up, worry etched into their faces. They had been about to call the police, having received a call from Mr. Jacobs about the situation. That night, we learned that the party Mike was taking us to didn't exist. There had been reports of a group of teenagers attempting to lure younger kids out of public places with promises of parties or gifts. The realization that we could have been victims of a kidnapping attempt was sobering. Our parents were furious, but relieved we were safe, thanks to Mr. Jacobs' intervention. Jamie and I spent a lot of time after that night talking about what happened, processing our feelings of fear, guilt, and embarrassment. We realized how quickly fun and games could turn into something dangerous, how easily we could be misled by the promise of acceptance and adventure. The bowling alley remained our spot, but we never saw Mike or his friends again.